for our macrame project, we need 2 strands of yarn at 90 centimeters, 2 strands of yarn at 70 centimeters, and 2 strands of yarn at 25 centimeters, for a total of 6 strands of yarn. And of course you need one of these rings. Now this is more or less what your macrame should look like in the end, and this is what we're trying to achieve. So before we start, there are some terms that you should know to understand the process fully. Now there's something called working cords, and these are the cords that we are working with. We are actively using to tie the knot versus a filler cord. And these are cords that basically fill up the knot. They remain passive. And there's some information that you need to know beforehand. So before we jump in, let's just look at the things we should know. Now, I've given precise measurements throughout this tutorial and in the written PDF, and it's really important that you do use precision, so try to measure correctly and follow the general guideline that I give. So the first thing we need to do is add our cords to our ring. It sounds simple, but it can get a bit overwhelming. So the first 2 cords we're adding are the 70 centimeter cords. Okay, so our middle length string, we add it in and make sure that the bottoms line up, so everything must hang equally. Hold that cord with your hand and add in one of the 90 centimeter strands. Okay, so we want these strands, the 90 centimeters, on either side of our shorter strands, and again, make sure the ends are pulled until they are equal so that everything is hanging straight. And we're also going to add in our last 90 centimeter cord, and again pull it straight at the end, and we're trying to make sure that these 90 centimeter cords remain on either side of our middle set of cords. And in this case, our middle set of cords is going to be our filler cords, and our outer set will be our working cords. And here's the general design for our macrame. A square knot is made up of a half knot plus a reverse half knot. Okay, so that's something that's important to note beforehand, is that we have this half knot and then we are going to reverse it completely and do a reverse half knot, and that then equals 1 square knot. And we need to have 6 square knots for this process, which means we are going to have 12 half knots essentially. So it is kind of a long, tedious process that we're going to go through, but we're going to do it step by step. So I will show you now with color-coded yarn exactly how to do this knot. For now, I'm just giving you that need to know information to mentally prepare you. And those 2 pieces of yarn on the outside, they are going to be called our working cords, and the middle cords that lay flat, those in the middle, those are going to be known as our filler cords for this particular square knot. So let's look at how we actually do this, the square knot. So first we start off with a half knot. Now in my case, my pale yellow and green cord, these are my working cords. These are the 90 centimeter long cords. So the first thing we're going to do is just hold all of our cords steady, and with our pale yellow cord, we're going to start making a number 4 or a triangle. But it looks more like a number 4 with our long green working cord over the pale yellow cord. So now one hand is going to act as a holder, and it's kind of going to hold the working cords in place, while the other hand acts as a pincher or a retriever and goes in through the front hole of the 4. So in through the hole of the 4, and you need to make sure those filler cords remain on top of your fingers, and then you're going to go down and retrieve that long green working cord. And you're pulling it through the opening of the 4. So one hand is the retriever and the other hand holds everything steady. And now you're going to pull on either working cord to try and tighten the knot. And at the same time, you need to just pull down the filler cords so that you can start shimmying the knot up to the top. And now this is 1/2 knot. So we have done half of a square knot at this point. So now let's look at the other half of the knot, which is a reversed half knot. So again, we are making a 4, but it is a reversed 4. So we're still making a triangle with our yellow cord, with the green cord laying over. And again, we're taking that pinching finger and we're going to go into the front of our 4, but now everything is reversed. So we are still going into the front of the 4, but from the other side, making sure that our filler cords go over our fingers and that our fingers are just pinching the long green working cord on the other side and pulling him through the whole of the 4. And that is the reverse knot. Again, we're just tightening the cords by pulling them on either side as well as holding the filler cords to shimmy the knot up towards the top. So again, a square knot is comprised of a half knot and a reversed half knot. So now we've just made one square knot. Now something to keep in mind is you need to count your knots because we need a total of 6 square knots. So I'm going to show you how to count your knots. So if we look at these strings laying across the filler cords, the yellow string in particular, and we count, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strands going across. So that means there's actually 3 square knots completed. So every strand is a half knot or a reversed half knot. We only have 6 of those strands. We only have 3 square knots at that point. So again, I just want to encourage you to count your knots. You need to keep track of when you've done a half knot or a reverse knot, and we're trying to get to 12 strands laying flat across here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So now that I have 12 of these strands working across, I have 6 square knots and I've completed that section. Let's move on to the next section, which is the wrapping knot. So there is some need to know information again before we start this process. So the wrapping cord is an aesthetic knot. Okay, so it's just holding everything together, and we're going to be wrapping from right to left. One hand again will be holding the filler cords, which now is all the cords that are inactive, as well as the other hand is going to be tying the knot with the wrapping cord. So this little string here, this is your 25 centimeter string. This string is now known as your working cord. Everything else is just filler. So we need to create a U with our working cord. So the U is going to be used as the wrapping knot. So I'm giving you an example here of a U which is far too big. That is a big U. It's too big. We need to make it a bit smaller, roughly looking like this. And here is an example of a U which is far too small. So you need that underbelly of the U to be relatively big. Just like this. So we're taking that U in one hand, and with the other hand we're holding all of our filler cords. So everything is just being held in place, and we're placing this U cord right underneath the 6 square knots that we've done. Okay, so make sure the top of the U is sticking out and make sure the underbelly of the U is just under your finger like that. Now we're going to wrap from right to left. So we're just going around. Please make sure that the top of that U strand is still sticking out and that you never fully cover the underbelly of the U. And you're wrapping around 6 or 7 times, keeping everything tight and secure as you wrap. Then we're going to place this end tail just over the top of the U, and I'm using my crochet hook to pull that tail through that U loop. Okay. And now I'm just shimmying the knot up to the top, like as close as it can be to the 6 square knots. And in order to secure it, I'm going to pull on the top of the knot. And this pulls the big knot into the wrapping cord essentially. And then to secure it properly, I'm just going to pull on both strands, the top and the bottom strands, simultaneously to tighten this wrapping knot. And then I'm going to cut off the ends. So the top end and the bottom end, we're just going to give it a cut. Try cut as close as you can to the end of the knot so that you can't actually see the piece of yarn sticking out. In this case, my yarn was sticking out a little bit. And that is your wrapping knot right underneath your 6 square knots. Now before we move on to the next section, there's also some need to know information. We need to know how to do an overhand knot. So we're wrapping around to just form a circle, and we're taking one end of a strand and going into the circle and pulling it through. I think that's quite a simple everyday knot. So let's look at the next section of our macrame and where we can use this overhand knot. So we will be using this overhand knot in order to group cords. So after our wrapping knot, what we're going to be doing is grouping these cords. We have 8 strands, and now we want to take these 8 strands and kind of group them together so there's basically 4 strands. And the way that you're going to group it is just take 2 strands, 2 by 2, that are the closest together. And it's really important that you choose these groups that are closest together because it can easily make the macrame spiraled and irregular if you don't choose cords that are right next to each other. So what we're going to do now before we start the grouping and the knotting is measure 10 centimeters. So just underneath that wrapping cord, you're going to measure 10 centimeters along your string. Now once you find that 10 centimeter mark and you've decided which 2 strings you want to group together, we are going to do our first overhand knot. So we're just pulling the yarn over, making a loop, and then going into the loop. Before you tighten it, we are double checking that it's at the 10 centimeter mark. So I'm just going to shimmy this knot up to the 10 centimeter point before I tighten it. And again, what we're doing here is just taking 8 strands of yarn and we're tying a knot and we're kind of grouping it to form basically 4 strands of yarn. So now find the next 2 strings that are closest together for another group. And again, we're going to do an overhand knot in order to secure it at the 10 centimeter mark. So just use the next knot as a reference point. And keep going. So we want a set of 4 overhand knots at this 10 centimeter point. And it should look something like that once you've completed 4 knots. Now we're going to create the netting bit, which is where your pot is going to fall into. So you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of knots at the top, and now we're going to split everything up and create another set of 4 knots. And it's going to end up forming a basket like this for your pot. So what you need to do is take 2 groups that are the closest together. Okay, so you have 2 groups in your hands, and what you're going to do is take one singular strand from each of those groups. And make sure that they are the strands that are the closest together. And we are going to tie these 2 strands together with an overhand knot. However, we need precision, so we are going to measure where 3 centimeters is. So we need to have a 3 centimeter gap between the top knot and the bottom knot of this little net. So find your 3 centimeter mark, and that is where you're going to do this overhand knot. So now we are tying 1 strand from each group together. And again, before I tighten, I'm just making sure it's at 3 centimeters because that is the length that will suit the design of the part that we've created. Okay, so now we're going to continue just going around all of our groups to ensure that every single group is connected to the strand next to it. So let's take the next group closest to our burgundy group, which is this pale yellow group. Take one strand from each group, and then we're going to tie a knot. And again, repeat the process with the next group that has been untouched, which is our green group. We're just taking one strand from each group, and we will tie a knot at the 3 centimeter mark in order to create a netting for our pot. It's also important you don't tangle the groups. As I said, it will make the macrame hang a bit obscurely. So now we have 2 sets of 4 knots with a 3 centimeter gap in between. Now our last step is a wrapping knot. So you know how to do a wrapping knot, and we're just going to do another one. We're going to measure 3 centimeters underneath the last set of knots that we have, and we're going to start our U. So again, you're taking a 25 centimeter cord for this, and you're making a U shape. With one hand, you're going to hold all the cords in place, and with the other hand, you're going to place your U roughly on the 3 centimeter mark. And then we're going to wrap from right to left, right around. And we're going to do 6 or 7 wraps. Make sure the top of that U is still sticking out the top, and make sure the bottom underbelly of the U is never fully covered by your wrapping. And then we want to take this long tail and pull that tail into the underbelly of the U that's sticking out the bottom there. So I'm just using my crochet hook to assist me because I find it to be easier. So I'm pulling the tail through the U. And now before I secure our knot, I'm actually going to do a pot test. So I'm taking my pot and I am putting him into the netting. And what I'm looking for here is an aesthetic similar to this. So if you find your top set of 4 knots is much higher than this aesthetic, what you need to do is move your wrapping knot a bit higher up the filler knots. That will kind of create a difference in where that top set of knots sits. So we want that top set of knots to be sitting kind of at the top of the pot, but not over the top of the pot. And then we're just going to tighten our wrapping knot by pulling on either end and snip off our excess ends. Our last step is cutting off the ends, and everything that you cut off from the macrame can be used as stuffing in your pot when we put everything together. So we're going to measure 4 centimeters, and this is a subjective measurement. 4 centimeters is just a safe measurement in this case. So you can measure 3 or 4 centimeters. I've chosen 4, and all I'm going to do is just cut off my ends. And now you should have a macrame hanger that looks something like this.